afternoon, everyone, or actually good evening now. This is Heather Turner, and I am the District 53 Social Media Chair, and this is part of our monthly social media educational series. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we start. We are recording this session, and it will be available on the District 53 website, hopefully in the near future. So blogging is one of those things that a lot of Toastmasters ask me about, and not just for Toastmasters clubs, but also for business. And I do want to encourage clubs to use it. If you have any questions, please ask them in the question bar to the right of your screen. And there's actually a handout for today as well, Blogging for Toastmasters, that I will also remind you at the end of this webinar to see if you can download again. And if you miss it, I would be more than happy to email it to you as well. Now, I do want to make sure that I touch on this in the very beginning, is Toastmasters very much encourages clubs and Toastmasters to use Toastmasters branding. And if you have not visited this yet on the Toastmasters.org website, they actually have a humongous section where you can find logos and templates, stock photos that you have that you can use, and also the brand manual so that when you're setting up your blog, please try to follow Toastmasters branding as much as you can. Now, most of the blogs I have come across that are Toastmasters related, unfortunately, have not followed branding guidelines, but I do encourage you to do that if you can. If you're using this as an individual blog and not necessarily for the club blog, obviously branding doesn't apply, but it does help with branding consistency. Now, a couple of quick things. Now, I can show you through how to go through and set up a Blogger blog or a WordPress blog, but there are so many, literally thousands of tutorials out there, both websites and YouTube videos and Udemy classes that you can take, that I basically would be recreating the wheel. So what I want to talk about instead are the different blog options that are out there, and also some of the things that you can do with it, and some of the tips and tricks that I have learned in many years of blogging, both for Toastmasters and for my own business and personally. So this might be a little bit shorter than usual webinar, but hopefully I will cover most of the things that we'll be going over. One of the common blogs that a lot of bloggers use is blogger.com. Blogger.com is owned by Google. So Google obviously loves its own product, and I bring this up because Blogger.com is probably one of the easiest platforms to set up, to use, and to maintain. It's also very easy to share admin access with other members of your club. Now, if you're setting up a blog for the club, I do encourage you to have multiple administrators. There has been too many blogs that I've come across and too many social media platforms that I've come across that unfortunately gone dead. And it's not because the clubs don't actually want to use them, it's because they've lost access to that. So I do encourage, if you set up any type of social media, including a blog, make sure other people have administrative access or have the username and password to be able to get into it. That's so important because that continuality of having officers switch every year, sometimes many things get lost in translation. There's also WordPress, and there's two different versions of WordPress. There's WordPress.com and WordPress.org. WordPress.com is the free version of WordPress. You don't necessarily need to pay for hosting. You don't need to pay for a domain name, but it also comes with ads. Tumblr.com is also an easy to use and probably, I would say, secondary to Blogger in terms of ease of use, ease of customization, and ease to set up. WordPress.org has the same backend. It also has many templates that you can set up for blogs themselves, but it does incur hosting costs that recur every month or every year, and you have to purchase a domain name. Plus, you need someone that's tech savvy in order to install it and also to maintain it. There's a lot more bells and whistles that you can put into it, but a lot more bells and whistles that also need to be maintained on a fairly frequent basis. I don't really recommend using WordPress.org because what happens with sort of like losing access to a blog and social media accounts, if the person that has set up the WordPress.org blog or website, if you're using it as a club website, if they leave, if they lose interest, something else happens to them, suddenly you have something out there that you can't use anymore. And if there's not another technical-oriented person in the club that has the time or the inclination to take it over, you have something that's not useful anymore. There's also Easy Speak. Easy Speak apparently also has a blog function so that you can put a blog into it. Unfortunately, FreeToast Host 2, which is the most commonly used website, free website for Toastmasters, does not have blog capability. I understand, and it's rumored that they are going to add that at some point, but I know that they have many other things that they're trying to work on and enable first before they get to that. There's also something called Medium. Medium is something where you can post a blog post into, but you don't actually have control, and it's not your blog per se. It's content that you're posting as an author or authoress, but you don't actually technically own it at that point. It's on the Medium platform, but you don't specifically have a page besides kind of a personal page that you can devote just to the club. I don't necessarily recommend Medium for a club blog, but if you're going to blog about Toastmasters or anything related to Toastmasters, Medium is very, very good for search engine optimization. So it is good to get the word out on there, but I really recommend starting your own. You can also blog on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has regular posts, and they also have something called articles, which are also kind of like blog posts. Similar to Medium, though, because it's on the LinkedIn platform, the content in there is technically only on LinkedIn, and it's only connected through a personal profile. So while it can marginally help search engine optimization, it's not going to necessarily be the best for advertising a club, but it might be great for advertising yourself or advertising and getting traffic to your Toastmasters Club website. Now, this is the back end of Blogger itself. It's very clean. It's very easy to set up. There's the bells and whistles are all in the back end, and it's very easy to look at. It's very easy to move around within it. The Blogger help section has a truly extensive list of help tutorials, and again, there's so many help related tutorials out there on how to use Blogger, how to use the back end of Blogger, that I'm not going to recreate the wheel and go over that. Now, this is the back end of WordPress, and each of these things have a lot of content similar to this that go out. So when you go to post, there's different options within posts. There's different options within pages. There's all different options in terms of what you can do with the back end. Both WordPress.com and WordPress.org look extremely similar on the back end. It's only limited by the amount of things you can do with it and the amount of templates that you can use within it. This is a WordPress.com blog, and as you can see, they do have ads. Unfortunately, a lot of people that have set up WordPress.com blogs don't realize that there's advertising appearing on their blogs themselves because they don't show up when you're in administrative phase. You can get rid of those, but you have to pay for it. And you also have to pay for a domain name if you want those connected. It's not that expensive, but if your club is paying for this, it's not necessarily something that might be in a budget, especially if you don't have a lot of money in the kitty for it. Now, this is an example of a WordPress.org site, and all blogs are great for content. All blogs are fantastic for search engine optimization. There is no wrong way to blog. There is no rules and regulations regarding what you can blog about or how often you should blog. So even if you can only post meeting minutes, for example, or post once every couple of months, is still better than not posting it at all. This is another example of a WordPress.org site. This is WordPress for Toastmasters, which has a lot of very helpful information about using WordPress if you do choose to use it either as a club website or use it as a blog for the club itself. Now, I just want to show you a couple of different examples of what people are using this for in regards to Toastmasters. So this particular Toastmasters club, and obviously this is an older screenshot that I took, but they're talking about, rest in peace. So obviously they lost a club member. They're looking at, buzzworthy speeches. They say leadership essentials. And again, this goes into the fact that there's no specifics about what you can and can't do talking about on a blog itself. Talking about speech contests is great. content for it. Always add pictures. Adding video is fantastic as well. If you can upload your videos to YouTube, which we had actually talked about recently on one of these webinars, you can embed them in blogs. Both of those together are so excellent for search engine optimization, and combining them really, really helps. One of the reasons that I like blogs and using them to promote both the club and the club members is just like posting pictures of a club contest or an open house on Facebook. People like to see their faces, and people like to see their names in print. So when you talk about a recent speech by Jane Doe that talked about, the wonderful empanadas that she made recently when her family came to visit from overseas, when she sees, or you tell her specifically or show her this link about the fact that you talked about her speech and maybe you took pictures of her demonstrating how to make empanadas at the club, she's going to share that with all of her friends and family on her social media. Or even if she's not on social media, she'll probably email it out to other people she knows, especially friends and family, to say, here, look at me, look at what I'm doing. Encouraging your club members to get involved with sharing blog posts, especially if they're listed themselves, if they're talked about themselves, is always a good thing. But that helps get it out there. So again, club contests, whether you go into details or not, but I know that some blog posts talking about recent contest winners have been shared so many times. And the great thing about blogs is they're called evergreen marketing. So once they're out there forever. You can have a blog post that you might have written for your club 5 years ago, and it will still impact your search engine optimization. So even if you do them sporadically, every little bit helps. And a blog post doesn't have to be a lot of text. There's a misconception out there that blog posts have to be novels. If you're writing a blog post can be some photos and a couple of lines of text. It could be a paragraph. It could be talking about this great article that you saw on entrepreneur.com that was talking about the 3 points of becoming a better leader. And you're not going to copy and paste the text out of that article, but you're going to link to it, and you might pull in a couple of sentences from it, but you're going to talk about why that article impacted you and why you thought it was important, or why you disagreed with it, for example. Just because it has to be text doesn't mean it necessarily has to be positive. You can write pros and cons of things. If you're a Pathways fan or you're not a Pathways fan, you could write what you like and what you don't like about the program. Pretty much anything is fair game to talk about online. So again, contests. And this is an example of a Joomla site. And Joomla is another platform that you can blog on. It is something that you need someone that's a bit more tech savvy to do. And I bring up another example of things because Joomla looks a lot like WordPress. There are actually, I think, 152 different types of blog platforms out there. There's a few free ones like the ones that I've mentioned, and there's also many paid ones. There's TypePad, and I can't remember all of the different ones out there. Try to stay with the common ones and use the ones that you feel the most comfortable with. If your club, for example, is starting out with a blog for the first time, the best thing to do is start a blog on Tumblr, for example, and maybe start one on Blogger and start one on WordPress.com. And actually have a couple of members of your club that want to participate in it. Go and evaluate the back end of this. See which ones you find the most user-friendly, and see which ones will actually do what you want them to do and give you the options that you want to have available for your club. When you've picked the one specifically you want to use, just go ahead and delete the other ones. You can always restart another one up again. If you do decide to start a blog for your club and then you switch platforms, the best thing you can do is actually leave your content on the current blog and link to it from the new blog. When you transfer content from one blog to another blog, you actually lose all of the former search engine optimization that you've gotten from those pre-written posts. So it's better to actually just link back and forth and leave those where they used to be. So blogging about Pathways is a huge one. And as you can see, she blogs all the time, and she's gotten a huge amount of page views on her blog. This is a basic blogger blog, but still has a lot of available bells and whistles that you can add. This is another Pathways guide blog, and I believe this one is based on WordPress. And I think it's a WordPress.com that she's paid to have her domain name connected to. But you can also incorporate things like donations welcome. So you can add a PayPal button, you can incorporate other social media channels into it, and also, again, you can embed YouTube videos or other videos that you might have done. And it's not just club contests, for example. If you have events, if you have open houses, there's so many things that you can do with blog posts. So you could type club meeting minutes. So my Cromwell Club, for example, that's what we use it for primarily. We post our club meeting minutes on it. You could do a transcript of a speech. You could do explaining how a meeting runs or meeting roles. You could do a list of ideas for speeches. You could do top 10 lists. You could do the best things you've learned from being evaluated, or ask every member in your club to give you a little bit of a contribution. You could ask for member testimonials. Even better, you could have member testimonials that you've done little video clips of. There's so many different topics that you can use in there. Hopefully you download the Blogging for Toastmasters handout, because there's some additional ones on there. But the sky's the limit realistically in terms of what you can write about on a blog. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a club officer that maintains the blog. It doesn't necessarily have to be the secretary. Having several people in the club contribute to it really helps. Find the people that like to write. Find the people that like to do online things, and have them help the VP of PR out with this. VP of PR, realistically, if you think about it, has the most of all of the club officers in terms of things to do on a monthly basis. Advertising the club is a pretty big job, so try to get some other people involved with that. Now, what about content? So I mentioned linking out to other things. One of my favorite bloggers is something he's called Leadership Freak. That's the name of his blog, and it's Dan Rockwell. And I belong to his email list. So every time he writes a new blog post, which is actually usually about daily, I get an email into my email box talking about his blog post. I don't necessarily read all of them, but I read a good portion of them. What else can you put in there? So obviously links to other blogs, links to other websites, member related. Realistically, again, the sky is the limit in terms of what you can talk about. Now, one of my favorite things to do is called content curation. And this isn't just for blogging, but if you're using any other social media platforms, looking for content to post on there. So if you're using Facebook, for example, or Twitter, looking for content out there can really help. And one of my favorite ways to curate content is to use what's called an RSS feeder. And RSS is real simple syndication. There's a whole bunch of different ones out there. Most of them are free. My favorite one is called feedly.com, and the URL is up here. And what you can do is you can find your favorite bloggers or find your favorite article writers up there, and you can add them to Feedly or whatever RSS reader you're using. And what they'll do is anytime they post, instead of having to clutter up your email box, because everybody gets a whole lot of emails in their email box, or having to go out and search for their blog post anytime they're promoting a new one, what this does is it automatically pulls in their blog links and a little snippet about it. So you can actually go back anytime you want and basically cherry pick. Now again, this is excellent for search engine optimization. This is actually a blog post that I wrote back in 2014, and it's on page 1 when you Google social media for Toastmasters. There's been so many things that I've Googled about Toastmasters over the last 10 years where I've actually come up and found on page 1 or 2, hey, this links to a blog post from a Toastmasters club somewhere around the world. So it definitely impacts SEO. So if for no other reason, you should be blogging to help promote your club. So as I said, you have meeting minutes that you can put in. This is actually nice because when we have guests that inquire about what happens at the meetings, or hey, I missed this meeting, what happened, we can actually send them the link to the blog post, and they can say, hey, this is what we talked about. You know, these are the types of things that we're giving as speeches. These are the type of things that we go over as table topics. And it gives a kind of a better overview of who's there, you know, what's going on in the club, and how the club runs. Because that is one of the most common questions that we get from guests is, I don't get how a Toastmasters club runs until they actually come and come to see it themselves. And sometimes trying to explain it over the phone or video or even in person if they're not there at the club can be a little bit difficult to do. So sometimes it's actually better if they can read through it. Obviously, posting meeting minutes as detailed as our secretary does is probably not for anybody, but from our perspective, it does help with guest kind of retention and getting them in the door. Now, Free Toast Host 2 does not have a blog enablement, but what you can do, whether you have Blogger, whether you have WordPress, whether you have any other platform, is you can actually embed the blog itself into Free Toast Host 2. If you ever want to do that, all you need to do is Google how to create an HTML iframe, and it will give you very easy instructions on how to pull the basic blog itself into a page in your Free Toast Host 2 site. Now, don't forget to advertise it, because while Google, for example, and Bing and Yahoo and any of the other search engines up there will pick up blog posts, because search engines love fresh content out there, and blogs definitely come in as fresh content, don't forget to advertise it. So if you have a Facebook page, for example, don't forget to put it into your Facebook page, and don't forget to tag people and say, hey, can you share this? Because the more exposure that we can get to Toastmasters in general, the better off we as a whole are. If you have a Twitter account, what I would suggest doing is either go in or connect them. And in our case, our VP of PR a few years ago, unfortunately, changed the email address connected to our Toastmasters or connected to our Twitter account. Fortunately, we had actually linked our Facebook page to our Twitter account in advance. So even though we have actually lost access to Twitter, we can still actually post to it. So anything that we post on our Facebook page feeds automatically into the Twitter account. This is extremely easy to set up. Basically, all you do is you go facebook.com/Twitter, hit enter, and then you can connect your club page right to your Twitter account. It'll ask for access, and you just hook them together, and then you can set it and forget it. That's kind of the nice thing about that. Twitter is unfortunately one of those few social media platforms out there where you can't have multiple administrators. So if someone changes the password on you or changes especially the email address associated with it, there really is no easy way to get back into it. But this kind of takes that out of the picture. Now, there's just a couple of quick things that I want to touch on. I did talk about blogging frequency, but I also want to talk about photo permissions. Not everybody likes having their pictures taken. There is a model release form that Toastmasters International has. You can also create your own. It is a good idea if you're taking a lot of photos in your club itself, and especially if you have visitors, even verbally, just ask them, is it okay if we take your photo? We will be posting this online. Some people are not comfortable with it. Some people obviously do not want their photo or their name out there anyway. The other thing is copyright and photo and content. That is so important, and thankfully I haven't come across many Toastmasters that have run into copyright violations, but I have talked to several. When you're using photos that are not your own, be wary of those free stock photo sites. Many of the free stock photo sites, you don't really know where the origination of that photo came from. Many of them can have digital watermarks, and if they're owned by a big company like Getty Images, your club could receive an extremely large threat letter of about $1,500. And even if you remove the photo, they will go after the club until you pay up. Getty Images has gone after many, many businesses, and I have heard of several Toastmasters clubs going to Google looking for free images that they thought they were safe to use and embedding them. I really encourage people, take the photos yourself, or if you need photos, go to the Toastmasters International site, use some of their stock photos, or go to a good reputable stock photo site. My personal favorite is dreamstime.com. There's also iStockPhoto, which is more expensive, but there's several other ones, Big Stock Photo. But buy your photos. You can get a decent stock photo for $1.50, $2 if it's really that important to use online. Just be careful of violating copyright. The other thing is content. If you're linking out, and I'd mentioned this earlier, to other articles or other blog posts or an article in Entrepreneur Magazine, again, for the same thing. If you want to copy some of their content, try not to do more than 2 sentences, because there's a couple of reasons for that. 1, you're violating copyright at that point, and 2, it also dings your search engine optimization, because what happens is your blog post then comes up as duplicate content. Whatever has been posted first, and is sometimes not necessarily even been around for a while, but Google will look at that, and if you're copying the content on there, it will actually decrease your search engine optimization value. Okay, now this is what the Blogging for Toastmasters sheet looks like. I tried to give you some suggestions on what you can put in there, and also some links to the media library and the resource library, and also some of the blogging platforms that I talked about briefly. So do you guys have any questions? I know I went through a little bit in a kind of short amount of time. I do have a lot of people on today, which is good to see, but I really like to know, if you have blogged before or thinking about blogging, what questions can I help you with, or what questions can I answer for you? Okay, the first question is, how long does it take to set up a blog? That's a good question, and that's probably not a good question for me, though. I set up a lot of blogs for other people, so for me to set up a Blogger blog, and mostly because I know all the bells and whistles on how to set it up, takes about 10 minutes to set up and customize it. I would kind of remember back to the very first time that I started messing around with Blogger blogs, and I think it actually took me probably about half an hour. And then I spent another 10 or 15 minutes messing around with, what the colors look like, and what different options and different layouts you could put in there. In terms of setting up a WordPress.org site or a WordPress.com site, actually probably about the same amount of time. Setting up a WordPress.org site is going to be more time consuming, because you are going to need to set up hosting for it. You're going to need to register a domain name. You're going to need to find a theme that you want and actually install it. If you want some additional bells and whistles, you would have to put in something called plugins, and also research whether those plugins are safe, because you can actually compromise the blog/site that you're using if you have an insecure plugin. And you also need to update it. So on WordPress.com, for example, they update the platform when a new release rolls out. On WordPress.org, unless you have it set to manually update, you actually have to go in and say, update this version, and sometimes occasionally it can break the site itself. It can break the blog. Okay, so the next question is, for a Pathways project, would you suggest creating a club blog or a personal blog? Now, that's a good question. I think I think that's one of the optional projects that you can do in Pathways. I would actually suggest talking to your club about it and say, if your club doesn't have a blog, is anybody actually going to use this if you create it? If you're creating a personal blog, think about how long you actually are going to use it. I know some people that have created blogs as a project, and then the project's done and it just kind of sits there. So if you're going to create it, figure out, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to put time into actually developing it and doing something with it? Or ask the club, is this something that we're going to actually use? Because you could create a club blog just for the project itself, and say, okay, I've had the experience of creating that club blog, but if they're not going to use it, then at that point you actually might want to delete it, because it's just going to sit there and languish. I hope that answered that question. Where can we find the slides from today's presentation? I can actually email the slides to you if you would like. The recording will be available on the District 53 website. We actually have a specific page just for recorded webinars. And what is the easiest and free site to start with if I've never blogged before? I would definitely go with blogger.com and set up Blogger, play around with the back end of it. You really can't break it. And I probably say this on every single social media tutorial, is you really can't break it. And I've tried to break most of these things. Blogger, the only thing you can actually do to the blog to kind of break it is delete it, and it'll actually come up with a big box that says, are you really sure you want to do that? in regards to switching things around, undoing typos, deleting posts, redoing posts, it always gives you the option to recover things so that if you delete a post by accident, it just goes into trash, but it's still actually, you're able to get it back out again. One of the things that I wanted to mention is in terms of blogging, that is a skill set because you're not just writing, you're using social media. If you want to use some of these platforms out there, keep in mind, these are great things to put on a resume, whether you're using it for a personal project, if you're using it for a club project. You could say, hey, I'm the club's blogger, for example. That looks so good on a resume, and it's great for business too. If you're a business owner, for example, or you are in a place where you can help the business that you work for use social media, having a blog is so fantastic for helping the business itself get found online. So being able to blog, and just being able to navigate around through all the things that you can do through a blog is such a useful skill set to be able to do. Okay, now do you have any more questions? Okay, the next question is, what kind of member testimonials should we put? Well, in terms of asking for member testimonials, that's a club thing. You could say, have somebody stand up there and tape them, or have them, just write up a paragraph or two, or have them write an actual article about how Toastmasters has benefited them, or what they've learned in Toastmasters, or the great friends they've made in Toastmasters. Again, there is no wrong way to do this. I know that if you had, somebody get up and just hold their cell phone, or even better, have a tripod, and just say, hey, could everybody in our club take a couple of minutes and make it part of table topics? Table topics, what have you learned in Toastmasters? What do you love about Toastmasters? What have been your biggest challenges in Toastmasters? And just tape those. Those can be your testimonials, and then you can use them all over the place, not just on your blog. You can put them on YouTube. You can pin them to Pinterest. You can send them into Twitter. You can put them into Facebook, either as a YouTube video and as a Facebook video. So it's so versatile in terms of what else you can do with it. Okay, and this is another great question, is it useful for things that we don't necessarily want to advertise on our website that are time sensitive? Yes, it is. Because from your website itself, your club website, no matter what platform you're using, it may not be as necessarily search engine optimized as a blog might be. So Free Toast Host 2, for example, Google does seem to pick up the fact that clubs have a Free Toast Host 2 website, but they really don't seem to be impacted by the text itself you put in it. It is a little bit, I found some specifics on some club pages that have a lot of content, but if you have something like an open house that's going on, I would definitely both list it on the website, but primarily I'd list it on the blog. And don't put all the content in the website, but link out to it. So put information about the open house itself, the main content put on the blog post, but link from your website. The one thing that I would make sure that you do is when you do that, you have the option in most blogging platforms and most website platforms, including Free Toast Host, of setting the link as opening in a new tab. Because the one thing that you don't want people to do is actually leave the website. You might have your meeting information, and that's highly encouraged to have it on the blog itself, but you want to make sure that they still have that open, so they're not leaving and then going off and somewhere else and forgetting to go back to the website itself. Okay, you had mentioned writing about lists. Yes, lists are some of the best topics for blog posts. So top 10 lists, lists in general. So, top 10 things I've learned in Toastmasters, top 10 funniest speeches I've ever heard, top 10 best table topics, top 10 most influential people I've met in Toastmasters, top 10 ways that mentoring rocks. There's so many lists that you can make. And the great thing about lists is you don't have to really go into detail about them. You can write one-liners about them. But those are such a fun way to do that. And top 10 lists get shared. And they don't necessarily have to be top 10, but top 7, top 12, top 15, top 20, top 25. But lists itself are one of of the most shared things after recipes. And recipes aren't necessarily something that you probably want to put on a Toastmasters blog, but you never know. I know that some Toastmasters clubs actually are culinary oriented, which to me seems kind of neat. But top anything lists are definitely something that people like to share and people like to read. Okay. Now, if anybody has any additional questions, I know that when you registered for this, you got an email confirmation about the webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to email that. You can also find me online if you just Google Forfeng, F-O-R-F-E-N-G. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. If you want to start a blog and you just need some help or you get stuck somewhere, please feel free to give me a shout and I would be more than happy to help. Thank you everybody for attending this. I hope you got a little bit of useful information out of it. And I think our next webinar is, I think it's on LinkedIn groups if I remember correctly, or it might be Twitter, but those are the two upcoming ones we have in the next couple of months. All right, thank you everybody. Have a fantastic evening.